Mariko was very diligent today, and she's like found out where all the plots of the Ramonet comes from in Morgio. I struggled to find it, so I was
I
really
have to
impressed.
ask my friend whose brother worked at Ramune.
Because it's like they're sourcing from like 3 or 4 different spots, no?
Yeah, she said she couldn't confirm exactly, but 2 to 3 plots behind the Abbey. So most
Yeah,
likely 100% from the Abbey.
within like right by it, yeah.
Yeah.
Wait, so it's, do you know what side?
No, she said
Okay.
like
Oh,
behind
okay.
this, yeah, behind the shed kind of thing. So yeah.
Yeah. I mean, judging stylistically, I can't help but think that it's probably kind of more on that like above it as opposed to
Yeah.
below.
Will be side, yeah.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Wine Coach at Home. My name's Nick. Before we start, I've put the order of the wines in the chat, just so you all know, and the sakes, obviously. But thanks for coming. Really excited. You might notice a different background. This is my kitchen. My partner's busy doing work and in the lounge room, so I was like, I'll just relocate tonight. But as always, I got some great co-hosts here, and I'm really excited to introduce them to you. One I've done a lot of webinars with, who has taught me a lot about sake, and we're excited not only to ask her all the hard questions about sake, but obviously Mariko is also a great wine expert as well. So we're super excited. Mariko, thanks for coming. How are you today?
I'm good, thanks. Yeah, your kitchen looks great. It's so beautiful.
This tile only went in yesterday, so that's kind of also, and I've got a matching scarf, so I was like, I'm just gonna.
Yeah,
It's a very spring vibe.
Yeah, it looks great.
Yeah, everything else is like wood and grey, and it's just this big, really loud tile. But I'm a really loud person, so that's great. And then my other co-host, who I've wanted to like engage with and talk about wine with for ages, Sheila. Thanks for coming. I really appreciate.
We're long overdue
time.
to be sharing some wine, I think.
I know, and I when I do Burgundy, I just want like there's just like two like people in my head. I just like, oh, I don't want to. And you're always someone who I respected a lot. Since like 2 years ago when we did that Jadot tasting upstairs, it was such an eye-opening experience. So
yeah, God, it's amazing how fast time's gone. I was thinking about that. I was thinking about when I met you though, when we had the dinner upstairs. I'm like, that had to have been 4 or 5 years ago easily now.
Yeah, it's been a long time. But I'm glad we're here together. We're all here together. This is going to be wonderful. If anyone has any questions, obviously, in the chats, throw them at us. I put the order of the wines in. I'm a little discombobulated today because today was the first brunch at Peter Pan since we reopened, and that, as if anyone knows, brunch is the worst service you can ever do. But I'm glad to be home and out of it. So that's good.
You guys have both patios going?
Yeah, both patios.
That's right, I knew it.
Yeah, it's like 12 tables, which is fine. It's just we're all rusty. Like we're all so rusty.
Oh God,
but it was fun. People drank Lambrusco, so I was really happy. Any day when people for brunch choose Lambrusco over mimosa, it's a great day.
That's a testament to your list. I mean, you honestly have one of, if not my favorite wine list in this city, and it seems to keep getting better and better and better.
You have to raise the bar. You have to raise your own bar. I don't know. I try. Anyway, I took a big swing this time, so we'll see how it pays out. We've got it's gonna sell some wine. Thankfully, there are some people in the chat or people watching who are big suckers for fancy wine, and I stole them.
I think we're all gonna get along really well.
Anyway, let's stop talking about me. Let's talk about Chassagne-Montrachet. The honest truth is that I had access to some PYCM, and it's really easy to sell PYCM, Pierre, Ives, Colin Murray. It's really easy. It's a cult wine. It's here. you just like, it sells itself, right? And I got 3 bottles.
Just like stirs the hearts of, I think, all wine lovers. It's like, oh God.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Way more than like sneakers or anything else.
And
But
so
it's rare. It's, which is so incredible about this tasting. I think, if people on the call aren't familiar, these are not wines you can find very often. These are incredibly hard to find. So this is very cool. I mean, same with Ramune as well. So
yeah, and it was like, do it.
Should we jump into Chassagne a little bit, or?
Yeah, let's do it. Who's been to Chassagne-Montrachet? Because I haven't. So.
I'm pretty sure Sheila has. Yeah,
absolutely.
I have a few times, but
I mean, it's amazing. It's, it's perspective wise. I'm sure most people might have a bit of the basic geography, but we're in the Côte de Beaune when we're in Chassagne. So we're in the southern part of Burgundy. And this is Chassagne is right in the heart. Like, this is really the mecca of the greatest white wines in the world. I mean, the village just to the north of it is Chassagne-Montrachet. And then, there's a lot of really interesting kind of ties between those villages. And then as you kind of move south, it almost kind of turns, it rounds a little bit towards the village of Saint-Denis. So, I mean, one thing that's really interesting with Chassagne, and I think a lot of the times, I think Chassagne is really, really hard for a lot of people to understand. I mean, if you think about Corton, a lot of the times we're thinking about this robustness and this minerality and this power. And if you talk about Meursault, everyone's like, oh, it's, it's this rich, it's this buttery texture. Or Chassagne-Montrachet, it's like, oh, it's all about elegance and finesse. And then all of a sudden Chassagne, it's kind of like, what is Chassagne? And I mean, a lot of this has to do with the fact that historically, a lot of Chassagne is produced by small producers and independent growers. Not as much of it was ever sold to the big domains. So, you don't see as much of it on major labels, but you can find kind of more unique examples. And I mean, the other big, huge thing here is the fact that the soil types, kind of when you go from the north part of the village to the south, range a ton as well. So you see a ton of different styles. So between the soils, the exposure, and the winemaker decisions, it's like, I think it's hard for people to wrap their heads around. Would you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's kind of where I'm very new to Burgundy. And for me, it's like, where does it sit? Like, that's always how I try to start in a region, is like, where do all these fit? Where does Meursault fit? Where does Chassagne sit? Where does Pouligny sit? Where does Corton sit? And for me, that's always been something to like, what makes Chassagne-Montrachet special. And I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head. It's super interesting.
Well, and the thing is that a lot of people don't realize as well is this was predominantly red. Like, this was, whereas Pouligny-Montrachet was always historically 100% white production, Chassagne was almost entirely red for a really long time. And as people started to realize that the whites did work really well, more growers were starting to pull vines up and pull Pinot Noir up and plant Chardonnay instead. And, the one big thing to remember, and it kind of it helps with a bit of an overall visual of Chassagne, is the further up that you are and kind of more towards the north, and especially at the higher elevation, it's always going to be kind of more chalkier, stonier type soils from the cooler spots. And when you're further down, you're always going to get more of kind of a heavy, more clay. So the problem is that I think a lot of people even maybe pulled up Pinot Noir where they shouldn't have. There's sites like Boudrio or Clos Saint-Jean, which are predominantly red sites now, still predominantly red sites that work really, really well for that. But I think when you have white wine examples from that, it's almost like a little too fat, almost a little, it doesn't have this brightness and this finesse that you want. So it's because the thing is, at the end of the day, is Chassagne whites just command higher prices than reds. So if you were a grower, it's like, people this is what they want. The reds are interesting and they're earthy and they're cool, but this is the land of gray white wine. So and then in terms of kind of below the village, you're always going to see those richer soils. And then actually, can you put that map back up again?
Absolutely.
In terms of kind of the best sites, so at the top, kind of like the top left here, if you see where like La Romanée is, or Encaire and Grand Rochot. I mean, Grand Rochot, a lot of people actually kind of locals would think that this really should be a Grand Cru, but kind of around this area. And so what's happening there is that's where it's starting to turn from east facing to more kind of southeast. So it's got, those vineyards have just this completely incredible exposure, and they sit up, it's a little bit cooler there. There's great drainage. Like those, this is an Ambazé over to the left. Like these are just kind of mecca for great white wines, and the ones further down. And what's interesting is we're going to talk about Morgeau. I mean, Morgeau is huge. Like we'll get into that in a little bit. It's always going to be a more weightier style wine that comes from down there. And then, so in Chassagne in total, I believe, don't quote me on this, I think there's 54 Grand Crus now, and there's about 40 Climats. So there's a lot to figure out. There's a lot to memorize, but the area it's really the most known for is 3 Grand Cru vineyards. Le Montrachet, Bâtard, there we go, Le Montrachet, Bâtard Montrachet, and Les Criots Bâtard Montrachet that sits just below it. So Le Montrachet and Bâtard Montrachet are almost about 50-50 split between the villages of Pouligny and in Chassagne, which is kind of interesting. But Le Montrachet, I mean, this is the most sought after white wine on the planet. I think, this is the greatest example of Chardonnay, and probably one of the greatest examples of white wine in the world. If you see Le in front of it, it's going to be on the Chassagne side. And if it doesn't have the Le, it's going to be on the Pouligny Montrachet side of things. But
I didn't know that. That's wonderful.
It's just kind of one way that they usually differentiate them. And Le Montrachet is all about, it's power, but finesse. I mean, Bâtard, which is literally right below it, is, that's the biggest of the Grand Crus. And it's all about this kind of weight and this density and this absolute power. And then Criot, it's definitely a bit less known. People don't know it as much. I think there's always a little bit of debate as to whether it should even, like whether it's still in the camp of the Grand Crus, but it's always slightly on the leaner side. But yeah, so Criot solely in the Chassagne side, Le Montrachet and Bâtard Montrachet straddle the border. And then in the Pouligny side as well, we won't get into that. There's Chevalier, and Chevalier, Demoiselle. There's a few on the other side too. So anyways, that's kind of the Grand Cru thing. So very, very, very small in terms of compared to obviously all the Liodie and the Premier Cru. Should we taste some wine?
Let's taste some wine. Boom. So wine number 1, we're tasting the 2018 Ramonet. Mariko, this is a wine that you represent, and I mean, for the people at home, like who've never had a Ramonet before, this is another one of those wines that, Burgundy lovers' ears sort of perk up when they hear the 3 syllables.
Yeah.
I mean, give us the cliff notes of Ramonet.
Yeah, it is a very culty wine for sure. We get people who email us from like God knows where to say, can we get some Ramonet? I said, yeah, well, sorry, probably not. But it's an interesting thing you said, Sheila, about the reds. Like we have so many beautiful reds from Ramonet as well, and they are certainly a lot less sought after, and that's a little bit of a shame because they are really beautiful. Yeah, and if anyone has the opportunity, you should definitely grab those reds as well. So this is a domain that's run by 2 brothers now, the Noel and who's the other one? Noel. Anyway,
Jean something, all right?
Jean. Oh.
Jean-Luc, maybe.
I'm gonna find in this.
Jean-Claude.
Jean-Claude. Thank you.
Yeah, I was going to look it up. I was happy to. Oh, it's here. It says Jean-Claude Ramonet. Right.
Oh. Yeah, Jean-Claude. So yeah, they like split their roles, but one has basically retired now, and Jean-Claude is the one who's in charge. He's the kind of the more front-facing, nicer one. The other one was definitely a little more like gruff, and you could not really see his face behind all the facial hair. So yeah, they're quite characters. And Jean-Claude's daughters are also in charge now. And they make some of the most kind of iconic wines in that area. This 18 is quite obviously young. We just managed to find it, or we just managed to get it out of the LCBO in record time. We had to pull a lot of favors for this last week. Karen had to go to Trillium a couple times, I think, to get it. But yeah, there's the wines are just so powerful, and all the research, like the readings out there, will talk about how there's Chassagne-Montrachet, of course, and there's lots to talk about within that. But Ramonet's wines are quite unique in that they have this like Ramonet style. They're very say big, and this is no doubtly one of the like the bigger, more masculine expressions. And I think you get that in 18, of course, when we start talking about vintages. This is definitely a very, very good year, was a warmer year. So yeah, you get a lot of power and like richness on this wine, but it'll age beautifully. Yeah.
But that really is kind of their house style too. Like there's lees stirring, there's, pretty extended time in oak. I mean, that's what I love about them though, is they always have this kind of, this force to them and these broad shoulders, but at the same time, that's never at the risk of losing, any of that minerality or that acidity or that salinity. Like it's always seems to be in perfect balance in their wines.
Yeah, and even in years where it is warmer, and they do use, this is about 30% oak, and yeah, you're right, like the lees stirring, which they've backed away from a little bit recently,
Right.
more so. But yeah, you almost kind of feel like, wow, is this going to be like a little much? And then you feel that like, yeah, the salinity and the acidity and the brightness and the energy there. So yeah, it's quite magical. You almost feel like, oh, is this going to be okay? And it is definitely okay. It's definitely Ramonet.
I was thinking one of the first things I remember hearing, when I visited Montrachet was about Ramonet, that he bought his piece of Montrachet, which is probably one of the most respected examples of it, in cash. I think it was in the 70s. I was like, can you imagine just like, I want to get some of this. How much?
Yeah. Pierre, right? Yeah, the father.
Yeah, which is crazy. Like, I mean, things, the holdings that they have now, like, it's completely impossible,
Yeah.
Burgundy I think, to have vines, have Rose and Dougie had to deliver the cash in a truck.
Yeah.
There's a lot of cash.
I
mean, compared to what we're talking about now, I mean, if you look at something like the iconic sale of Clos de Tar or something not too long ago, that was estimated over 30 million a hectare. You're looking at, it's just, what these guys were able to do and the land that they were able to get and build on is it's priceless now.
Yeah. The timing and the probably like luck, to a large part, which is why, like, okay, I'm skipping a little bit in thought, but like Kuheji, there's 2 sakes we're drinking from him later on, and he managed to buy land in Burgundy as this like foreigner. This is like Japanese sake maker bought land in yeah.
When was this? Recently or?
This is probably maybe like 5-6 years ago. So yeah, in expensive times.
And Maurice Saint-Denis, right?
Yeah. It's like I don't know how he did it. I don't want to ask, but it's pretty strange actually. I wonder where he.
I want to taste that wine. I'm so intrigued. Intrigued.
Yeah. I gotta try to find that for you.
Is he bottling already?
Yeah, I think
cool.
his first vintage would have been 16, maybe 17, something like that. No, maybe earlier. Yeah. But I've just started to see it in the market in Japan. They all have like kabuki labels on them. A little bit like, I don't know if I like the labels that much, but I like the wines for sure.
Oh, that's amazing.
What is so good.
What does everyone think?
When I opened them, and I opened all 3 of them, this was like the biggest, and this was like the acidity wasn't as like pronounced from the other 2, like not like clarity, didn't have the clarity, and it's definitely benefited from that that day in a little pouch just to broaden out a little, but like it's definitely the biggest, and it was kind of the one I wanted to like, I don't know, it just like, it's good palate cleanser for lack of a better word. Like it's good to get you in like the mood of this, like
yeah, this
powerful.
This is jumping right into the deep end of Chassagne.
Yeah, when you said
We're
this
just
was
gonna start the night with Ramonet. Like,
Yeah.
let's just do this the most fabulous way possible.
I mean, if anything, it represents me. It's just like I go in right into the deep end. And I had a question for both of you. Like when we talk, I mean, obviously, I live in a world where Premier Crew is kind of where I can afford right now. Is like what Morgio, is it like I see it a lot, and obviously it's quite big, but what are some of the other Premier Crews that you kind of like, are considered the top tier
In Chassagne?
in the village.
I mean, okay, so the one thing with Morgeau and the accessibility of it is one thing because it's huge. It's bigger. I don't know if you even want to bring up that map again for a sec, because I can show you something on there, it's kind of interesting. So can everyone see where Morgeau is there, kind of towards the bottom left? But Morgeau, Les Brusson to the left of it, and Vin Blanche, and actually La Boudreau over to the right, and Escrote are all technically Morgeau. So it looks kind of big until you realize that all of those kind of surrounding it are considered Morgeau as well. And even the Abbaye de Morgeau wraps into La Chapelle below it. So the reason you're going to see it a lot is the sheer size. It's big, something you go up to, as I was saying before, something like La Romanée or like Grand Ruchot or Encaillere. These are fabulous examples, but look at the size of Grand Ruchot compared to all of Morgeau. It's price is always going to be a little bit more. You're for sure going to pay more for those vineyards. But at the same time, it really comes down to just a matter of scarcity as well. There's just not as much. I mean, there's some interesting examples as you kind of round out towards the right. That's actually starting perspective wise. When you get to the right of this map over by like Clos Saint-Jean and Bergère and Chevenot, this is actually starting to look up more kind of east, nearly north in some areas. So I think, where if you kind of want to buy the best examples, I think generally speaking, kind of sticking to the higher slope, the higher on the slope and kind of right in that mid-tier area just below the town. I think, this is where you're really the kind of the best of the best is going to come from. But they're all great examples. They're just totally different style.
And like, I mean, these are about just over $100 a bottle. I mean, I think that's for like top tier Chardonnay. I'm pretty happy. I'm happy to pay that, right? And I think, obviously it's a lot of money, and I drink wine for a living, so I have a different sort of, gauge. But this is a kind of, for me, the world I need to get into, like, and collect Burgundy and all that kind of things. And I know there are a lot of people watching who have that same kind of, are in that same kind of position where they're like, okay, where do I invest? Like, where am I looking when I look to Chassagne-Montrachet? And, Morgio's never really steered me astray. And, I think that's a good entry point because it's so large that the prices can be that slightly lower. And I mean, it's delicious.
And then village level as well. Like there's incredible examples of village wines. The thing is, with Burgundy, it's always the reputation of the producer is usually more kind of profound in how we think about it than even a vineyard themselves. So, if you want to, I would always say in terms of getting into great wine and being able to start experiencing Burgundy, drink even the lowest on the tier wines from the top producers you can afford. Drink Ramonet Aligoté, and I'm assuming they make, there's Bourgogne Blanc and Pierre-Yves Collin, Saint-Aubin and Bourgogne, like these, whatever you can get in the door, you're always going to get, I think, the best examples from more of an entry of a top producer than a top wine from an entry producer, if that makes sense.
Sure. Yeah,
absolutely.
Just drink Bourgogne from all the top guys.
I mean, and that theory has been tested really well in like Barolo and Nebbiolo in Piedmont, where you're getting the quality of winemaking. You're getting the same level of winemaking. You're just getting a different, a lower expression, for lack of a better word. But I'm a big fan of drinking Aligoté from great Burgundy producers. It's kind of getting so much. The Aligoté is getting so much better now. I mean,
Oh, I mean, and something like the, honestly, like the Ramune one, or, we just brought in, Marquis d'Angeville, like examples like that. Like these wines are completely lights out. They're so great. They're so mineral. They're so focused. And it's, you're paying $40 or $50, maybe a bit more, depends on the producer, as opposed to, getting into, let's say, and I'm, again, by no means am I undermining it, but getting into, say, a top producer's on Ray or Grand Rochot, you're over $200 easily, depending on the producer, maybe up to $300. So there's a big difference.
Yeah. And I feel like these producers are really smart. Like they know that they need to invest in their lower entry wines in order to like keep growing their base, And
sure. And I mean, I think it's the next wine we're drinking, but Jadot has always been an incredible example of this. And I mean, I've had this conversation with them on a million occasions of how can you expect anyone to get into your top tier range if you're not outperforming at the entry level? You cannot forget about the entry wine. They are, in a lot of cases, they're somewhat, in a way, almost more important. When you bring Le Montrachet into the cellar, if you're a good winemaker, there's not a ton you have to do. Just don't screw it up. You know what I mean? But to make the best example, like kind of the best expression of a Bourgogne, takes more thought. I mean, so Jadot, what they ended up doing, so they're historic winery, they're based right in Beaune, but what they did when they realized, when they kept growing, they said, we can't actually continue to make our Bourgogne Chardonnay and our Bourgogne Pinot Noir in this winery because we're making Musigny here, we're making Claude Lebez, we're making, all of these top wines, and we don't ever want it to kind of fall second. So they actually ended up investing a metric shit ton of money in a winery, its own winery in Givry, and they have a state-of-the-art facility where they only make Bourgogne Chardonnay and Pinot. I mean, that's not what we're drinking. I'm digressing, but I'm just saying, it's really, really important for top producers to be making their entry levels at the same level of quality that they do their top wines. So,
yeah, and look, it was actually one of the questions I wanted to ask you was about like Jadot, like it does span this breadth of price points and like all through Burgundy and I guess beyond somewhere maybe, but like
they make on any year, usually it's upwards of about 200 to 220 different bottlings in every single vintage. I mean, to be able to do that, at this level takes an incredible amount of skill. This is not working on the four wines that you have or the 4 vineyards you produce from every year. So it's, but I mean, they've been at it a lot longer. I mean, what Ramune started, I believe in the 30s or 40s, maybe. Pierre-Yves Collin started, I believe, in 2004, 2005. I mean, these guys started in 1825. So they've got a few, a few more years behind them. But one of the big things with Jadot is also what a lot of people don't realize is how much they've invested, because they have maison on them. I think a lot of the times they're associated with being just largely négociant. They're now over 50% of all their holdings are all domain vineyards. I mean, they've got over, I think it's somewhere along the line of like 35%, 40% of their vineyard holdings are in Grand Crus. Like the amount of land that they've been able to accrue over a century is huge, and kind of as much as they could, as soon as the money was available, it was all about literally just continuing to buy, continuing to have things in their hands so they can determine quality and work with it all the way through, which is huge. So, but I mean, this wine in particular, so this is Abbaye de Morgeau. So this is a really cool one. So this vineyard itself was actually established in 1100 something. But in the 15th century, the King of France, his troops quite literally devastated the village. And the only thing that was left in this entire area was a bread oven and a teeny chapel. So see in Morgeau where there's the little square right in the middle, that little gray square. So that's the abbey. We call it an abbey. It quite literally looks almost like a tool shed. Like it's teeny tiny. And that sits in the middle. So what's interesting with this single vineyard, Abbaye de Morgeau, though, is if you're looking at a map, you're going, it's missing. So Abbaye de Morgeau is a premier cru that can be the vineyards that wrap around Morgeau, around the top of the little chapel there, and actually dips down below in Le Chapelle as well. So it can be from vineyards in either of those premier crus, or they could label it as whichever one they fall in. So it's a bit of a personal choice as well as to how a winery chooses to label it. But I love this area because it's quite small, and the south side, again, you're always going to get a bit more of kind of, a chalkiness, but clayness. But on the north side of it, you're always going to get a bit more of kind of that chalkiness I was talking about. So that what's neat is kind of this unique terroir that wraps around actually a very small area. So it kind of depends where the plot is. I mean, we were talking about this with Ramone right at the beginning of the call, is, when these sites are so big, it kind of depends where the wines come from. Like another great example of this, kind of probably the most iconic example of this, is a vineyard like Clos Vougeot in the north. And it's so big, and it spans kind of, it totally changes as you move through. So depending on where you are, you could get very, very, very different quality from the same Grand Cru. And that's really kind of the same with Abbaye de Morgeau here. So Jadot's piece is about 0.44 of a hectare. So whatever that is times 2.4, my math's not good. Small, it's a very small piece. And it's just quite literally just to the south part of the Chapelle. So just if you're looking at the map, it would just be on the left side. So it's actually it's a great little piece of property. They absolutely love this one. It's really kind of nice, really nice exposure. Yeah. So just kind of it would be kind of under the M in Morgeau there. So this is a little bit of new oak. This is 2017, which I'm super, super excited for, because I think, this is probably one of the greatest white wine vintages ever produced in Burgundy, in my opinion. So jump into it.
It's so aromatic. It just jumps out at you. Like, it's just charming.
This is ready to party. Yeah, Botner said about the acidity. It's like the 17, I just think for the white, the reds are good, but the whites from 17 are just this kind of, everything is in like perfect unison in them for the most part. Like you'd really have to screw up winemaking to not make fabulous whites in 17.
I think the tasting we did, the Jadot tasting we did a few years ago, we had the 15 of the Abbaye, and it was, I remember going into that tasting. Oh, my camera's so bad. I remember going into that tasting thinking that the Pommard and the Volnay were going to be like, Pinot Noir, if that's what everyone wants to talk about. But the Abbaye was like the best wine out of the lot of them. It was so delicious. I just recall that moment so clearly. And revisiting it, 2 vintages later, and 15 and 17 are like completely miles apart. But like, this is such a captivating wine. I'm glad. Of all the tastings I did, I didn't. I'm glad I have 3 extra bottles of this one, because I'm definitely going to be pouring it out and sharing it with people, in the restaurant, because, a lot of it is, a lot about Burgundy is about access, and that, it can be about affordability, but as a sommelier and someone who my job is to serve people wine, I should be able to. It's my job to figure out these problems and to give people a way to taste this so they can aspire to something. Like, it's all well and good to read this in a book or, see it on Instagram about how, your friends or people or follow are drinking really cool old wines. But, it's kind of has to be my job to give you that access, right?
This is such a good way of doing it, though, because I mean, if I was sitting at home right now and having, if there was a bottle of each of these here, that adds up. So to actually be able to do it like this and taste these examples side by side, I mean, to go from Morgeau and kind of, realize that you're right in there from different parcels there, and then move into Abbaye de Morgeau, so go a little bit smaller, and then we're going to move to Maltois in a second and move kind of right into the village of Chassagne. It's nice because you can actually start kind of understanding. This is the way of understanding Burgundy. Exactly.
And we always talk, we always did tastings like this in person before the pandemic, but there is something to I mean, virtual tastings aren't perfect, but at the end of the day, there are 20 people here on this call, 25 of us, I guess, in total, who are all tasting this side by side. It's a very rare occurrence, even before pandemic, to be able to do this. and not to be filled with the people that, you know, sometimes can overtake these wine dinners and these conversations, and we all know who they are. I'm not like, this is good for people who want to learn, or want to experience something, and not be overwhelmed by people being told 5 different ways, 5 different times, how many times you've been to Chassagne-Montrachet and how many times you've visited.
Or how deep what you have in your cellar. How many bottles of Costa do you have? Yeah,
which is fine when that's the conversation, but more often than not, I feel very uncomfortable, and I can only imagine, like, you know, normal people who are trying to exist or like trying to explore Burgundy to feel completely intimidated, and like intimidated even more so, and to just go, oh, I don't want to, like, I'm not that person, I'm not that rich, I can't afford these wines. But you can afford these wines. You just, you know, need to find ways to make it, you know, if you like it, you should, you know, do it.
Well, that's the thing is, I mean, you hit the nail on the head. It's a hard place to understand, but because there's always this slight, it's interesting because, you know, you go and you visit, if you have the opportunity to go, it's incredibly humble. And like, as soon as you're there, you're reminded, you're like, oh, we're in the land of farmers, you know, this is what it is. But yet at the same time, this kind of, you know, global understanding and representation of Burgundy is this white glove service, and, you know, you have tasse de vin around, and, you know, everything gets so fancy. And it almost seems like there becomes this massive disconnect from where it started to where it ended. But because of this kind of end thing being this fancy world of complicated wine, I think a lot of the times, you know, people don't even know how to ask questions, like just as simple as, you know, what's the difference if you drive down here, and like, but put it in layman's terms, like, please just help me understand it without, you know, getting into all these very hyper specific things. It's a tough place to figure out.
Well, and the winemaking, I think, has really changed, you know, over the years, so that even though we're drinking 18s and 17s, they're super drinkable, and we can enjoy them now instead of waiting 30, whatever, how many every decades, right? So I think there's a lighter touch, and we can actually drink them now.
Yeah, I agree.
Well, and I mean, I don't know if you guys want to jump into PYCM now, but that's actually kind of a great segue into it. Is, you know, this is a guy who worked for his. I'm like, I'm just going to jump right in here.
Yeah, do it. That's all we want, Kate. With all we can.
It always just like sends shivers right up the back of my spine. You smell them and they just vibrate on this different level. So Pierre Paulin-Moret, his father, he's the eldest son of Marc Collin. And so Marc Collin is this very, very established winery. And so he worked there for a long time, but he ended up branching out on his own. He married, and then his wife started a small business. And in 2005, I believe, was the first harvest that he left his family domain. And he actually took some, I think it was like 5 or 6 hectares of vineyards with him. But what's interesting, and just talking about, you know, wineries changing. So this is a new property. So for a new property to be essentially the golden child of Burgundy, and one of the, you know, the biggest up and comers and the more respected, is awesome, but he's also making wines in a different style. Like, his family had major problems with premature oxidation. And when, for him starting his own property, I mean, a huge focus for him, and something he really needed to figure out was kind of getting away from that. And he's like, you know, I'm not going to do batonnage anymore. You know, I'm not going to heat the cellars anymore to encourage malo. You know, I'm not going to keep the wines in barrels as long. Like, he had to really start thinking outside of the box, and not just thinking about, you know, the connection to the old Burgundy, and this is the way we do it, this is what we know, but, you know, how do I kind of rethink this a little bit? And I think his attention to detail and his willingness to also just kind of, you know, try things in a bit of a different style has made these wines, like, when you try them, they don't taste like anything else. They taste like PYCM. And now, I mean, he's got most of his vineyards are in Saint-Aubin and Chassagne. He's got some beautiful holdings, a little tiny one in Assainière, which is right below Chassagne-Montrachet. He's got Chevenot, he's got Cailloret, which is awesome. Like, his bottlings are wild. Like, he's got so much good turf. And then his reds are always kind of considered like the Chambord-Musignan style. Like, they're the most kind of, you know, this very ethereal kind of pure style. But yeah, so
I've never had the reds.
Yeah, I think I've had like one ever. I actually don't know, but I wonder what the ratio is. I'm sure it's, 10-1 at least.
It's so concentrated and it's so dense, but
So
in a
I
way
don't-
that's not intimidating.
Do you want to bring the map back up and we can look at Malchois quickly, maybe?
Yeah.
So the name Malchois that's loosely from, it was like a Latin word about martyrs. And it would have been, so where are we here? Okay, so you see yes, where number one is. So, there's a bunch of number ones, sorry. Yeah, exactly. So this is really, I mean, you would actually consider this, like, this is within the village really of Chassagne. So it was named after this essentially resting place of the martyrs. So they think that it was probably a middle-aged cemetery where this was, because that kind of would have made sense that it was just right by the town as well. I doubt there's any cemetery there anymore. There's just beautiful vines, but maybe there's something that makes the wines extra special. Who knows? So on this map as well, not unlike Morgeau, so Maltois and then Escret and Les Places are actually climat of Maltois as well. So it's all three of those little vineyards there are essentially considered Maltois. This is really, it's always known as being like a much more kind of rich, powerful style wine, which I think really works well with Pierre-Yves' kind of winemaking style. They always have this kind of wildly, big energy to them. I mean, this is old vines. They'd probably be about at least 50 years old here. And just where it is, and I can't help but think that it probably has a little bit to do with obviously the buildings that are right behind it, the way that the sun would come down right on it as it kind of, you can kind of see that it's turning a little bit southeast here. That makes it one of the warmest sites as well. So, between warm site winemaking, which, sees probably at least 16, 17, 18 months in barrel, a good chunk of that being new oak. These are always like, wildly powerful wines.
Yeah, that's great. Kind of lacks on the mid palate. Well, bring it back, man.
I think these are bigger barrels too, right? And like, at least compared to Ramonet for sure.
The thing with this too, and it's funny, yeah, that you say like there's almost something. I think this and the Ramonet, you could literally have open in a decanter for a day and come back and they would be fundamentally different. It's like they just need so much air. They need so much kind of shaken around to come alive. And these are young vintages too, obviously.
It's kind of controversial, but the PYCM I'm serving at the restaurant is in a pouch. I store them in a pouch. And it is very controversial. But there's a lot of reasons why. One, they're filled with argon, so that it's not going to oxidize. But two, I have razor thin margins on being able to pour PYCM. Like, I have to make it affordable for people. And so if I don't pre-portion them, people are going to over pour, do crazy things. So I'm not give people the right experience. But that said, after months of doing these tastings, I know the pouches, that small amount of oxygen, I know the minute it drops in that glass, like you're getting a really great experience rather than having to wait for the wine to open up. When you're sitting at a table, you want to like experience these wines straight away. And again, controversial. I know a lot of people, as we all know, don't like when I put things in pouches, but as someone who serves the wine, I can tell you that the wines definitely benefit for that 2 or 3 days in a pouch, just to like seeing the minute it touches the glass. It's great.
Well, the thing is, at the end of the day, it's like, these are not delicate old wines. I think there's actually the Ramonet, I believe, is showing beautifully. I love where the Jadot's at. I think this is actually in a bit of a closed down thing right now. And that's really not uncommon at all, especially when these wines are young. But giving this a little bit of oxygen and stuff, like you cannot hurt these wines.
Yeah.
No, this is wonderful. Yeah. Oh, Marika, what did you think of this one? I mean, this is great.
Beautiful, yeah. It is very different, though, isn't it? Like their style, the expression of it. It's it's kind of, I guess, more modern and youthful. Yeah, but yeah, I guess it is a little bit of a close down.
It'll be interesting to see. I mean, like I'm just leaving in, if anybody has any left, they're easy to drink very quickly, but even just leaving, an ounce in the glass for a bit and just come back to it before you go to bed, see how it's changed.
Yeah.
But when
It's
you
super
did
cool.
the Gilberto ones, they certainly like got better by putting into pouches with that bit of time and air, like you said. I really enjoy those.
Yeah, I've not, and I hope to be proved wrong, but there hasn't been a pouch, like there hasn't been like I've done Syrah, Barolos, Ghiberto, white Burgundy, sake,
Okay.
every sort of genre I've done have, I think, like not better than they would be in a bottle, but like I've never been disappointed by that. I'm like, oh, there's the pouch, they're flat or they're not tasting well. Like much more than like when, you know, I've kept a bottle, like when I've done the session and I've kept it in the bottle, like kept the wine and I just poured from there, like the pouches do much more than that. And I mean, who cares about pouches? But I do. But
Honestly,
like,
but this is how we get to try these things. So thank you.
you have and like, yeah, it's just one of those things. It's like you wouldn't it took a pandemic for us to like experiment with wine service. Like Coravin was the last big thing, and I'm not saying this is a big thing, but we've all had to put wines in smaller vessels over the last year and a bit, and like we have to learn from that and see what we can do. And I think, you know, I'm glad we've been able to do this, and the wine holds up, and you know, as much as it should. You know, it's great.
Do you think the same for sake? Like, what have you guys noticed with it?
It's been so at the very beginning of the pandemic last year, I think I put it into bottles, and they did not hold up nearly the same as they did in pouches. So the pouches were way better. Well, and also, you know, Nick doing it helped, and doing it with a little gas was really good. Yeah, but you know, like years ago, there was a sake like competition in Toronto, and when I entered our sakes, I opened a lot of them the night before because they didn't say you couldn't, and entered them, and they were so much better. Like for sure, sake too needs a little bit of air because there are a lot of times your bottle kind of like reductively protectively, so opening it up really helps.
So this might sound, you know, forgive my naivety, is decanting common with sake?
It's not common, but it's something that I think should be common. And, you know, we talk
Okay.
about a lot, like, you know, Stu, you know, and I talk about that a lot. Yeah, when we do dinners and events, we definitely decant some sakes.
Yeah.
Yeah, it depends on the style. Some are like ready to go right away. And it's kind of like wine, I guess. Like it depends on what it is. Yeah.
I mean, now we're talking about sake. We should start drinking sake.
Yeah, thank you for the segue.
I'm very excited for this.
Look, the point of this tasting was never to compare Chardonnay with sake. These are different. This is a different creation. But I did. These producers, especially these sake producers, are definitely influenced by Burgundy, and they definitely look to Burgundy and Champagne and all these great white wine regions to like help them understand people's palates, what people drink, how to, you know, define, you know, chilled, clear beverages. It's such a strange, when I so often talk about sake and wine in the same sentence, and it's really hard to just, beverage is such a weird word. Like it's such a terrible word. It's like so corporate-y, but like, how do you group sake and wine together? And often I just say wine accidentally or sake accidentally when I'm referring to both of them. But so we're tasting the 2011 Kuheiji, and Marika's obviously going to talk about it. But the reason when I tasted these wines, these sakes, again, see, this is my problem. I felt the age had developed this sake in a way that does remind me a little bit of Chardonnay, and that richness, that kind of like the fruit's getting a little, like in sake terms, getting a little golden, a little bit more like richer and more reminiscent of apples, which is like a pomaceous fruit rather than like the melons and the tropical stuff. But that's as far as I'd gone. And these aren't even wines these aren't even sakes that I would kind of favor. I'm not a big Dunkin' Joe fan, but I'm really excited to sort of explore them with Marika. But Kuheiji is a character. I mean, Marika can explain that, but
yeah, he's a very big character.
this is the wine. This is what we're drinking.
Well, 'cause
20.
there's probably a ton of similarities in terms of even just this, like with sake producers, like correct me if I'm wrong, like just with this focus on terroir and, you know, these site specific, you know.
Yeah, for sure. These guys, so the two producers that we're drinking right now, these would be the people who talk about terroir a lot. Kuheji, he's probably the most. I mean, he has vineyards in Burgundy, so that helps. But he used to be, he was a model in France, like on the runways about 30 years ago. He's a very good looking guy, but it's 30 years ago, just saying. But he fell in love with wine and wanted to make sake that was like encapsulating that spirit, right? So of course, sake and wine are totally different, even though like Nick said, like I talk about wine, sake, rice, grapes interchangeably often. It just happens to get confusing. But he is someone who started all his sakes since 2008. Everything has a vintage, and he only uses Yamada Nishiki rice. So all three of these sakes are going to be with one rice. And this rice is considered like the king of sake rice.
It's the Chardonnay. It's the Chardonnay of the rice. Like it's essentially the grape, the rice that is considered makes the finest, has a great balance of yields, complexities. I mean, as a person who literally learned the word about 4 weeks ago, this is my me popping in to just say this is what it means.
Yeah, this is the rice that, if you're going to learn one rice, this and like omachi probably would be the two to know. But yeah, this is daiginjo level, so it's polished to like 40-45%. But both of these guys would tell you that that's not really the point, right? So all three of these sakes, the rice is from Hyogo Prefecture, but from a very small place in Hyogo Prefecture. And there's so many like conversations and thinking behind rice versus grapes that are not easy to draw parallels on, but they're trying to kind of think about it in a like a similar way, I would say. But rice, because it's pulled up every harvest, all the roots are. It's very different from grapes in that you don't have like bedrock and topsoil and all that kind of stuff. So it is very different, but you do. We're starting to see people who are talking about rice in this kind of way. So this one, 2011, is it's not common to see this kind of age. We aged it for ourselves because we wanted to be we wanted to be extra weird. Yeah, in 1.8 liters, and after all that, Chardonnay and Chassagne, I think it's a little more savory, and there's a little caramelization, of course, but there is, for sake especially, there's still quite a bit of acidity and freshness in this. And then after probably like an hour or so, it'll get a little more like rich and more savory even more.
I wonder whether someone like Kuheiji, who has this love affair with Burgundy, is trying not to replicate Chardonnay or the flavors, but things like acidity and alcohol to very closely resemble the flavor, the journey, especially acidity. This has a very Burgundian acidity profile, and I'm just curious. I don't know anything about this person, but
even the texture of it too, though. There's I think there's just so many interesting parallels between the two of them.
Yeah, he like the acidity in sake is quite different, right? Like even if there is acidity, it's not citric acid, it's more glutamic and malic acid. So it's one time he made us taste his test brew, and he used wine yeast, and it had so much citric acid, and it was completely not balanced. But it was interesting to see where these people are trying to go with what they're doing. Yeah. So he wanted to see. Yeah.
Sorry. I was just going to say, does soil play much of a role at all then?
Yeah. So that's the big question, right? So within the next, the third sake we're going to have, for example, is this Yamada Nishiki rice from 1292, address number 1292 is where they're getting this rice. And of course, the soil does play a part, but because you're uprooting every year, there's like debate over what constitutes terroir. But they're all, the aspects are different. The elevation is different, and also like usually it's not one grower. There's like different farmers involved. So we're talking about farming methods that are different too, which would still also be part of like the human geography or the terroir behind that too. Yeah. It's like we tasted some sakes on Monday that were this like ID series, and there's 3 different plots where the sakes come from, brewed all separately, and they do taste different. But if you presented them to someone at a table, I think it would be really hard for someone to say, well, this is like this is like this. They are different, but it's not as different as like saying, this is Morgio versus, Martois. That would be a little bit harder to do with sake still, because it is more of a process driven beverage. Yeah, I'm not sure what the word is. Beverage, yeah. Drink. Yeah.
Drink.
I think we're at like a really interesting place where we can start to have these conversations, but it's definitely like just in the infancy stage. Like mapping plots of rice is still quite young too. Yeah, it's only just started.
Because rice doesn't. The other thing interesting about terroir in sake is that because the rice doesn't contain any moisture, or the different level of moisture than the grapes do in wine, they're sourcing water from wells or mountain springs, and that, like, the mineral content sort of affects the terroir like a lot as well, like the character of the sake. And I think that's kind of where you have to break apart, but at the same time there are similarities. It's like if you study the water, where it comes from, the mineral content, you can tell a lot about what that sake is going to taste like. And I think the grapes just inherently do that within their little skins.
Yeah.
I thought that's also like another aspect of terroir, especially in sake. And I find that super interesting. And there are parallels in Scotch and in beer where where the water comes from is super important to the process. And it's just one of those. Sheila, I'm curious what you think of this sake. I for someone who like has this, experience in Burgundy and wine,
It's interesting because it's even going through the 3 Chassagne and then jumping to this, I actually found what was nice, even with the age on it, it did actually feel, and I think it's also just when you jump from beverage to beverage, this total freshness to it, which is really nice. Like I didn't really know what to expect from something, with 10 years on it, but I really like this savory kind of element to it, and this nice kind of, it has this nice mid body texture, which is great. I mean, I have such little experience with them, but I love the aromatics. Like I don't know. I want to learn so much more about it.
I think you chose a really nice one, Nick, to like start the sake, because if we started with the other 2, like you said, it would have been a quite different feeling too. So I think the 11 bridged everything nicely, like you were saying before.
Yeah, because I found the last 2 Daiginjos to be a little sweeter on the palate, and I felt that like going from something as dry as the Chardonnays to hitting to this like sweet, but you know what I mean, like that sort of sweet, roundness of the Daiginjos. I felt that the 11 kind of was a bit more mellow and a bit more savory, and it kind of bridges the gap.
There was nothing kind of jarring from jumping from one to the other, which I think, I kind of thought there might be, but no.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so I think this is that like very subtle, like calmer style to get us like ready for the other 2, which aren't like, huge. And
the other thing I love about this sake producer Keiji is he's got that audacity of a Burgundy winemaker, for lack of a better word. He's like, I'm gonna call this sake human. It's just who I am. Like it's
for all humans. He talks about himself in the third person. He probably calls himself human for sure. Yeah.
Well, the water of desire. It's like, give me a break. I get it. I love that energy.
He would love you. He's such a character. Yeah, he's like, we'll give you a lecture for hours. I've been there. But the rice harvest, depending on the conditions of that year, you do get like, it's very, very obviously different to grapes, but you do get different moisture levels and like the weather when they're harvesting. So Yamadanishi is typically October, like second week or so of October, where it's harvested. If it's raining really heavily and they can't harvest everything, that would be very, yeah, Nick, you look like you have a filter on you, like a
I
very
know.
creamy
My
filter.
camera is really expensive and it doesn't focus very well. So I'm really trying hard to like stay in the same place, but I'm
Um, so
drinking a lot, so it's getting like really hard for me to stay still.
yeah, so yeah, like you would have different expressions of the grape, of the, sorry, of the rice as well. Yeah, like you'll
It's
have it.
hard.
Yeah, it's
It's
hard to.
hard.
It's hard to.
It's hard talking about these things without confusing
Yeah.
people.
So the next sake, the 18, is the same producer. It's the Eau de Désir, the Water of Hope. Apparently, I thought it was Water Desire, but anyways, um, this is the 18. So this is his current release, and people. Um, the understanding behind sake is usually that you would drink a sake the year that it's released, right? But these guys, they talk about the rice harvest separately from when it was brewed. And this is using only 18 rice, and it was probably brewed end of 18, beginning of 19. But he puts it in the bottle, it's aged in a bottle, and it's released when he thinks it's ready. Yeah. Um,
Historically, why is it that it was always within the first year? Was it just kind of one of those things that it's just the way it was, like, or was there a reason for immediate consumption?
it's in more like modern
Bureaucracy. Say it, Mariko.
yeah. Thank you. Yeah, we heard from Stu last week too. So yeah, like breweries were taxed when they made the sake, when they brewed the sake, right? Not when they sold it. So if they kept any behind, they would have already been taxed for it, and they had to pay their bills, so they would sell it. Yeah. So like, if you go to a brewery and they give you some sake to taste from the tanks, it's technically legal because they haven't declared it. And the government made a lot of money taxing breweries. At one point, it was like 20 or 30% of their, or more, I think, of their income. Yeah. So that's why people didn't hold it back unless they were really like invested in aging sake or the science behind it. Yeah.
But the tradition before the tax office was to like not age it, but like that freshness wasn't
like
so much of a concern.
Yeah, like when sugar was less abundant, for example, like sweet sake was what people wanted because it tasted sweet, right? So depending on the era of sake brewing, we would have had different things that were in vogue. Yeah.
I also find that really interesting about sake is that like it's really easy, better to understand. It teaches a really good lesson on like cultural terroir and like understanding why a style of sake comes from this region because of the food. Because I think Japanese food has so much, it's not more understandable, but like there are very clear and definite like styles of Japanese food. And you sort of see that like Noto style, for example, comes from the fact that the fishermen who worked in these sake breweries in the winters when they weren't fishing made sakes that suited their cuisine, which were seafood dominated or fish dominated. And so, and I think wine, we often sort of skip that part, or we sort of only talk about it in terms of like food pairings. But, sake can teach us a lot, especially in the wine world, about like why was Canadian Riesling so sweet, back, in the 70s and the 80s, but because there is a cultural component and like it helps, I don't know, teach people. For me, it definitely taught me more about like understanding the people when it comes to wine, not just the soil and the climate, that the people and the culture affects terroir a lot as well. And I think it's much more evident in sake for me anyway.
Yeah, the food of like Japan, you go from one city to the other, and you're like, well, they eat this, but we don't. But that's in France. The one thing that I'm always confused about in France is not the only one thing, but in Champagne, I always wonder what people like ate. It's like it's not I haven't been able to like really understand what the food of Champagne is or was. Like, is that, yeah, is it just me? What makes Champagne in food? I feel like it's so touristy, I guess, maybe now in the big cities.
Which I think, honestly, I think is too bad. But I mean, that's a whole nother class in itself. But I mean, I think Champagne is probably the most versatile with food of probably any alcoholic beverage on the planet. But you're right. It's like, it kind of gets caught in these traps of, pre-dinner enjoyment or special occasion, which, but it works with so many things. And especially when you think these, the cold, long winters in Northern France and these, hearty things, like it holds up to everything. And it works well with rich stuff, but people don't consider it a lot now.
Yeah. That's
Yeah,
just
which I think is really sad.
right. Yeah. Yeah. I've had some like questionable meals in Champagne and Epernay where, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's it too, is I think, nowadays things just get diluted a bit too much too.
And I think the history or the business behind Champagne is a big part of it too. Yeah. But yeah,
we should do a Champagne one soon.
Yeah.
There's lots to talk about there.
That was my little, yeah.
If I can figure out a way to put champagne in a pouch,
oh god, yeah, of course.
will. It's a license to print money. I will do champagne dip tastings every single day, and they will sell hundreds of dollars.
I saw some friends in Vancouver planning some cocktails. Can you can it fast enough? Like,
yeah, I know. I'm really sorry, everyone.
Well, that's what I was talking about. I was trying to imitate canning champagne.
Oh, canning. Yeah, canning is weird. We investigate canning for our cocktails as well. But it's unless you're canning it under, like you're bottling it under pressure or portioning it under pressure. I mean, the cider, which is the sake number 3, we haven't even got up to, like that is effervescent. I mean, it holds its gas, but like, I don't know. Anyway,
I would say figure it out. Champagne one, we all hang out on the patio.
Oh yeah, I agree.
Nothing better than just like.
I'm happy to do a wine. Like when we open the shop, I can do an event again. The first one is absolutely champagne. I've got some beautiful Carlsberg to pour open for everyone. I'm really excited. This sake number 2 is really cool. Like it's again like this density, this there's lots of flavor here, and I want to say, oh, give it some age and it'll unwind like it would in a wine, but I don't know. This is not the case. I just think this is how it is, and it's delicious.
So he's his brewery used to be a place where they made a lot of sake and then they sold it to the big guys, right? So it's kind of like a negos type thing. But then when he went back after he was done modeling, he said, I'm going to make sake that I want to make. And so it became very, I guess, like singular and very, very him, right? It's fresh and like juicy and there's bitterness. And you definitely, when we first received this, maybe like 3 months ago, it was way more like sharp and angular, and 18 vintage apparently for rice was quite good though. But it's really calmed down, and I think like the texture has opened up a lot. Yeah. The 17 in the same sake compared to this 18 was definitely like a lesser quote unquote vintage, and it was a little sharper and a little edgier. But if you want to taste, I think 3 vintages of this sake, you can go to Sakai Bar. I think he's still got some help.
Yes, do.
Yeah.
Get it with us. No. I mean, look, I'm a novice in terms of selling sake and serving sake. My goal now is just to hide it in tastings and never tell people until it's in their class.
Yeah.
But if you love sake, go to Stu's Sakai Bar. He is the best sake provider in the city, and hands down. So
I am embarrassed that I have not been. He's on Harvard?
Dundas.
Okay.
And like Dufferin Brock-ish. Yeah.
Okay. That's
next to Black Dice or opposite Lulu Lounge. I mean, that's
Mikey.
The whole neighborhood is completely changed. I like this. I've never had a lot of Kuheiji, and I'm put off a little bit by his attitude to his audacity, but this This is pretty fun.
I love that like
I-
sweet fruit nose to it. Like it's just it's so kind of captivating.
Yeah, very floral, like lots of white flowers. And he's like, drink champagne at the beginning of the meal, then maybe have a glass of my sake, and then switch to wine or whatever else you drink. So he just really wants to for it to be part of the conversation, right? Not that you should only drink sake at night, but that you should like incorporate it into.
I like that. I like that attitude. Like, it's nice that a sake producer who has this love affair of Burgundy and of wine to like help people like Dumbos like me incorporate it into a tasting or an experience that isn't just sake, it isn't just wine, that there is a progression, just like different styles of wine suit different times of your experience. So I
Yeah,
do appreciate that.
he went to like Paris on his own to try to talk to Psalms, and he went selling on his own, right? And he speaks this like mix of just like Kuheiji and French, and like it just somehow people understand, but it's not one language. It's like a mix of
Love that.
things. I feel like. Yeah, he's truly a character. But I think it took someone like him to really like be the weirdo to let other people follow in his path, because he's like maybe in his like late 50s now. And the third sake that we're drinking, he worked at Kuheiji for 3 years, and he's like in late 30s now maybe. But there's a long list of people who have been inspired by Kuheiji. Yeah. So this last sake is Matsumoto, so Sawaya Matsumoto. He's from Kyoto. The brewer actually is no longer at this property, at this brewery. He had him and his parents or his dad had a family feud with the rest of the family. It's very like around the world. I think this is a story of family is not. You're not supposed to work together, really. But 1292 is the exact location or the address of where this rice comes from, right? And this is the 17 vintage. And again, this is like what it's like the vintage that we're supposed to be drinking. So also from Hyogo Prefecture, Akitsu village, and then Saido is the most northern part of Akitsu. So there's 3 parts, south to north, within Akitsu village, and this is the most northern part. So again, like you can draw definitely some parallels to Burgundy and the villages. Yeah, this is a very very singular, I think. Like, but it's quite creamy and quite rich as well on the palate.
Yeah.
It's
You don't see this in the pouch, but Matsumoto's sakes are like almost like so energetic and like effervescent. Like they always pop when I open them, and it's such a surprise, because literally it's like sparkling wine. I'm like, oh, what's going on? But I always find that such an interesting part of his sakes or their sakes is that they have this energy, and I don't know, it's just, this is sublime. This is wonderful.
Is that to kind of blend it, like kind of this brighter thing, like you might see with something like Arnais, or an example of that? Like, is it just to kind of give it this like more kind of lifted thing?
Yeah, with Matsumoto in particular, the last sake, he makes his sakes very, very like protectively, so that he doesn't see oxygen, and his bottling, like everything is to make sure that it keeps really fresh. And he used to be a DJ, and he talks about
I love these sake
he
producers.
talks about like the CO2. He's also like, if you're interested, he's like a very old school what is it like he scratches a lot. So Sean saw him like scratching. Anyways, he's good. But he talks about like also like to drop as much CO2 into the sake as possible. Like that's part of his like philosophy of making sake. And I can't not draw a comparison between like dropping albums and dropping CO2. I'm pretty sure he does it on purpose. But yeah, and his sakes like don't have a lot of glucose. Like if you measure the numbers, it's not a sweet sake. He makes the sake very like tight and linear, but he wants those like the bubbles and the structure and the bitterness to really play a part. and he eats out a lot at like great restaurants, and that's part of the thinking behind the pairings. Yeah.
I like that bitterness. I think that's the thing that I often forget about Matsumoto's sakes is that like they have that bitterness, and not in a bad way, in the way that like good wine has a little phenolic charm to it. It has this like texture on the palate that isn't just fruit and alcohol and like Daginjo.
Good like Albarino, or like it has those qualities for sure. Yeah. This the pricing for sure, like it's not the same at all, but with Kuheiji and Matsumoto, these guys have really worked hard to say to raise the value of what they're doing. So it's not in Japan, basically it's like price fixed. If you're making a Junmai Ginjo, it can only be this price. If you're making a Dai Ginjo, it can only be this price, really. But these two and others have said, well, you should judge it for what it is and like how rare it is and what we're putting into the sake rather than the classification. So these three sakes, I don't think any of them are actually classified. I think Kuheiji, the second one, it's a Junmai Daiginjo, but they don't really like, that's not what they're talking about. So they want you to judge it for what it is rather than what it's called. Yeah. So yeah, these are a little bit more in price for sure, and they're not typical for sure, right? Like if you go to do a sake tasting somewhere or a sake class, this isn't really what you're gonna get. But they're the people who are really changing sake.
You make a good point, and I think this is what I'm grappling with at the moment as I serve sake, is that people have this idea of what typical sake typically tastes like, and it's really not. They're always 100% wrong. Like they're like, I don't like sake, and I'm like, okay, well, and in the wine world you hear it the same. I don't like Chardonnay. I don't like Merlot, and it's like, yeah, but you can't say that. Like, there's always an example that will blow your preconception out of the wine, out of your mind.
But it's
and
how
sake,
find that example.
yeah, and like this is why I kind of sneak sake into all my tastings, not all of them, but a lot of them. And yes, I will continue to do so for many months. So if you don't like sake, bad luck. But that's the thing. It's like I know once it's in the glass, like people trust my palate over the years for my palate in wine, and like sake delivers so much. And like I just know that if they like my palate isn't wrong. I have to trust my palate to like provide good things to other people. And it's just, you got to get through what they think is typical. And typical sake does, like, there is typical wine, but the reality is that us through here, we don't drink typical wine at the end of the day. Like we drink, the more unusual wines, because the most typical wines are like $12 a bottle or $8 a bottle, or, made in wherever. But
also, it also just is a matter too of what we were talking about with access. We're lucky that I think the three of us are very fortunate that we have access to these things that from a consumer's perspective, a lot of the times is how do you get the super cool sakes? Dev just made the comment of like the Pinot Grigio or the Pinot Grigio. Yeah. I'm like, as a total junior to it, I'm like, I would have no idea going into a shop. So it's what are consumers' options? I mean, my question for you is, where do you find great sake? I mean, you guys mentioned Sake Bar, and obviously we can purchase through you, Mariko, but where are the great spots in the city to kind of to source it?
Well, Nick has definitely brought in some new sakes over the last couple.
Stepped up my game. I've stepped up my game.
That was like the introduction to the whole catalyst behind Hakogako and doing the classes with Nick, so that that you have some cool ones. You have some like weird ones, good weird ones, right? And then there's places like Bathurst Local, like Glenn brings in some, again, like it's the if the wine and the beers that he likes, the sakes are kind of in that world. So definitely more like natural and funky, with some classics in there as well. The regulars, so that's I'm biased, but it's I choose the sakes in there. It's on the west side, so it's a coffee shop with a sake selection. Sakai bar, I think we already said that. Yeah, from Stu, you can buy a lot of sakes by the bottle, and he'll tell you more than you want to know about them, for sure. So,
Well, he just made a comment in the chat too, which is so interesting. Just that idea of, the staff education side of it too, being able to, I guess, when people walk in the door, being able to confidently talk about it.
yeah, it's a like a lot of questions, a lot of hurdles, not hurdles, but things that we have to, I think, address to get there. But places like Zakushi, like you guys are, I think, on the east side, Zakushi or Kingyo, they have not a lot, but they have a good selection of sake in those shops, in those restaurants.
Rachel was asking, there is a sake distillery in the sake brewery in the distillery district, and they're really great. And
Right.
they do, like, I try to promote them a lot, and they do a lot of like flavored sakes, obviously to cater to
The masses.
Tourism, I'm sure.
those people, but they do some really cool, some like more traditional styles that are more niche, and they do it in smalls. But one of the things for people who don't know a lot about sake is pasteurized, usually twice, and it keeps it safe for traveling, but you can also have unpasteurized sake. And so we're really lucky in Toronto that we have a sake brewery that can serve unpasteurized sake, or nama sake as they call it, in a way that, like, is the way that you should be drinking unpasteurized sake, that it is fresh, that it is drunk quickly, that it is not shipped across the world. And so, like, it, just like cheese and just like other things, when you unpasteurize it, there is a bit more flavor. There is a breadth of flavor that you often miss when you have to ship something across the world, in a shipping container. So, Azumi is really great. And like, my advice is, like, talk to them about their unpasteurized stuff, because that is the thing that they've got on every other sake that you could have in the city. And it holds its own. It's not Japanese sake, but it's pretty great, and I'm really happy when I drink it.
Yeah, the Arabaki, or like the free run, is my recommendation from them. You can always get different batches. So I think they're on like batch number 196 or something like that right now. And
No,
like,
200. They're at 200. They did a thing, and they're like, we're celebrating a 200th batch.
You just said.
Yeah.
I'm being corrected. Yeah, so it's batch number 200. So that's the 200th batch that they've made ever in 10 years. Yeah. But you can get, they'll tell you when it was pressed so that you can see that, and you can age them if you like, or you drink them, accordingly. Yeah.
And I will also say, to like the education point that Sue made, like, I didn't know anything about sake in January. And like, I reached out to Maruko and said, hey, are you teaching this year? I really want to learn more about sake. I want to be able to sell sake in my shop, and I want a good collection. And like, I obviously had a different experience to the other people who learned through your 4-week course, the Hako Gakko, but it didn't take a lot. Like, if you know wine, like, you can create similarities, and you can focus on the right things that help you understand sake the same way you understand wine. It is a different thought process, and it doesn't always fit the same way wine does. But, it's March 27th, and I feel so much more confident about sake than I did like 3 months ago. So it is intimidating, but, wine is intimidating also. And we move through that, and we can move through sake. And like, what it opens up to us is this whole new style of beverage that has the finesse and has the complexity and the terroir that we find in wine that excites us about wine. And it's just you can do it, especially if you're someone in the wine industry. You can learn about sake without the pressure of like, oh, I don't have to perform about this. I don't have to be tested on this. I don't have to sell any of this. I can just enjoy it. It's such a pure form of like education. It's a wonderful experience. So that's my sake.
Rachel just asked a really good question, which I'm super curious about as well. Is the best drinking temperature for serving it at?
So the 3 sakes that we had today, I would say would be like white wine, like white burgundy temperature. So slightly cold, but not like out of the fridge. And they definitely open up better when you've had them open for a little bit, right? A little warmer. But it depends on the sake. If you're having ginjos, if you see the word ginjo there, which are more floral and like more lifted and more aromatic, then those ones you want to serve probably chilled. And then the more richer like jinmais and like natural lactic fermentation styles like kimoto, then you can have those warmed. Yeah. So I would just taste it. And if it's fruity, floral, then have it chilled. Right. And then if not, then try it room temperature warmed, but it's your sake. So you can, really play around with it. Yeah. Like if you're having a sparkling sake, most likely you don't want to have it warmed, but it's kind of common-ish sense. Yeah. It depends. Yeah.
The other thing I love about sake is that it doesn't have the like rules that wine has. Like Marika's often talked about, adding beer to a sake or adding spices to a sake, and it's never going to happen with obviously Chassagne-Montrachet. But like I also like that sense of adventure that sake there is in the sake sort of world where you can add a spice or pepper or add a lager or something to it to like enhance the flavor or enjoy it in a different way that we often don't get with wine. And I think that's also a fun aspect that you can explore because it almost sounds sacrilegious and you're like, I can't put, why would I can't put freshly cracked pepper in a sake, like in a wine, like no. But in sake, it's a little bit more acceptable. And I think that's super interesting. Like that's exploring a level of drinking a beverage that wine never sort of really touches upon.
Yeah, and it's a really big like topic right now. And these three sakes, maybe less so, but like if you have a nigori sake, a cloudy sake, I really like thick nigoris, and you lighten it up with a little splash of beer or radler, or some spice, like you're saying. Like even this 2011 human, he doesn't know that we aged it. Like he does. This is not how he necessarily wanted us.
I've told him, or I'm telling him right now.
Yeah, please tag him and send him the photo because I think
it's fine.
It was a release. So 2011 was released to us maybe in like 2013, and then we kept it. He did not, like say, oh yeah, you should do this. But we just like, wanted to experiment with it.
So wonderful.
Yeah, but it's like there's so much you can do with it, and it's still really like there's so much we can try. There's less rules for sure. Yeah.
That's so cool. I had no idea of just the fact that you could, like with radler or spices, or I'm like, I probably assumed that would have been blasphemy.
Yeah, but like again, all three of these sakes were aged, like have age statements because that's what they want you to do with them, but that's not a normal thing. Like for most sakes, age statements are not normal, and the majority of sake that's made probably should be drunk within the first year for sure. If you want to age it, then that's you can play with it, but it's usually the case that you want to drink it fresh. Yeah, we just happen to do a lot of things that are not that normal.
But that's good. We need that. That keeps people on their toes. Thank you everyone for visiting and watching. Mariko, Sheila, I honestly appreciate it. This is such an interesting. I've learned so much, and I hope you have too, and I hope you've had fun. Sheila, what were your final thoughts about the sake? Going into like a bit, intimidated with tasting some sakes. I'm curious to see what your final thoughts were on the sake portion of our tasting.
Me?
Yeah, you.
Honestly, I just find it fascinating. Like, I feel like I could sit and talk with you for another hour about, just because as somebody so new to it, it's interesting to see the parallels and, just in terms of, texture and acidity and these things and, just how they drink. There is definitely kind of these albeit vague resemblances in style, but all three of these are so interesting. Like, you kind of go from more floral to the more almost like saline, more mineral side of things. And then, in the last one, almost this like slight, almost like nutty bitterness to it, I find. I'm like, and they're fascinating, but again, without necessarily having a palate for it, to be able to actually sit and try all three was fascinating. So I'm like,
Yeah, thank you, Mariko, for sharing. Like, I chose the wines. Like, obviously at PYCM, I was like, I'm gonna get Jado, I'm gonna get Ramonet. And then I was like, Mariko, can you pick some sakes for me? So Mariko, thank you for picking these sakes for me,
No,
because
thanks for letting me do that. It's really fun.
But I really enjoyed it. And I mean, thank you both. Like, honestly, having you both sharing a screen with me is a real honor. And I think the world of wine and sake, you know, especially in this city, like, we're all friends. We all know each other. We all respect each other. Like, we can all, you know, share our knowledge and have some fun with it, because, like, I enjoyed every part of this. Like, I enjoyed the PYCM, I enjoyed the Jado, I enjoyed the sake, I enjoyed the Ramonet. Like, you know, we should, like, we have good taste. We enjoy tasting things in our glasses. So, like, it doesn't matter necessarily what it is. So I'm excited that we can, like, play around with it, and, like, I had a lot of fun. So thank you very much, both of you.
The thing that you said, which is awesome, is just the opportunity to learn from each other. But I think, you know, so many of us have, you know, maybe have our niches a little bit, or have the things that, you know, we focus on a bit more. I mean, you know, the world of wine and sake as well is just, it's so huge. Like, there's just so much information as well, that, you know, kind of being a part of an industry where we can kind of do something like this and share it is very helpful in terms of, you know, the education.
So my cheese corner, Holly, I'm really sorry, I forgot. It was the Brillat Savarin, which is obviously Brillat Savarin. I've read his book. He's like a hero of hospitality, and they named the cheese after him, and that's what I wanted to eat. So sorry that you all get to see me eat some cheese, but Brillat Savarin is one of the best cheeses in the world. Thank you so much, Mariko, Sheila. I appreciate your time. It's Saturday. I appreciate you sharing your knowledge with me, because, I mean, Burgundy is still terrifying to me. And honestly, over the last 3 years, without both of your guidance and, like, inspiration, I wouldn't have the wine list I had today. Like, you all contributed to, like, the things that everyone says how great my wine list is. Like, it's both of you that have both, like, influenced me a lot. So I appreciate it. And, you know, thank you very much. And it's nice to just, you know, hang out with both some people who love wine, and, you know, and just have some fun with it. So have a lovely evening. Have a lovely night. Thank you very much. I hope to see you all again in person. I
cannot wait to sit at the bar and just hang out with you guys. It will be long overdue.
I have sake now. I do that now. So I have sake by the glass. Like,
you will be forced to drink a sake.
Oh, well, Sheila, you haven't even tasted Omachi sake. Once we get to Omachi, which is like, it's like the Riesling of, I mean, if we're talking Yamada Nishiki as, like, Chardonnay, Omachi is kind of like Riesling. And we're going to explore all of that together. Yeah. It's going to be wonderful. Mariko, thank you very much as always. I mean, I love hanging out with you, and I'll see everyone soon. Everyone have a lovely night. Bye, 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 bye.